We normally wait a little longer. We do politician 4:30 start time, which is not human. 4:30 start time, yeah. But in this case, we're in the midst of 19 public events, most of them town hall style. We're heading to Peterborough out of here, and then we have a remote one, a virtual one that will involve folks in Nevada. And of course, New Hampshire's, the most important. Shame on us, yeah. But Nevada's pretty darn important too, and we're doing really well there. So we'll be doing that later tonight. It means we're on a schedule is what I'm telling you. And I appreciate you being here tonight. A couple of things. First, if you like state or local politics, we may have crossed paths. My name's Steve Marchand. I used to be the mayor of Portsmouth. I was a candidate for governor last year. You may have heard about that. Despite that applause, breaking news, I did not win. Oh, well, what are you going to do? We'll do it again sometime. But a silver lining of that process is that a year ago tomorrow, I met Andrew Yang. We got coffee in Manchester, my hometown. And at the about 5 minutes in, some of you may have heard this by now, I realized I had made a friend. We were both 44-year-old, first-generation American, fathers of two who really like math. Holy crap, that's me. And he's a great guy, which what you see in person or on the TV, these are the same things. This is the same person. His authenticity, I think, is at the core of his appeal. And it is a historic process that he's been in the middle of. He's been doing this really for about 2 years now. And for a long time, you probably weren't terribly aware of it. And then a bunch of things happened in the spring. I joined him in April. Those two sentences are coincidental. But podcast and YouTube and long-form interviews, and then low-dollar donors getting him on the debate stage, and then the snowball kept going. And think of it this way. He raised $1.7 million in the first quarter of 2019. On New Year's Eve day, he raised $1.3 million. That's what we call progress in the business. $16.5 million in the fourth quarter, one of the highest of anybody, including people that have been spending their entire adult lives preparing to run for president. One thing you'll hear from Andrew is this is not somebody who was planning to run for president. This 3 years ago, and I'll be introducing his wife, Evelyn, in a moment, who will then introduce Andrew. Yep. If you haven't seen Evelyn, she's a delight, incredibly smart, sophisticated, articulate, and supportive spouse. And as somebody who has been a mayor at a very young age and run for statewide office, I can tell you, it is not enough for the family of the candidate to be tolerant of the candidacy, because you will tell by the unhappiness of the candidate over time. It is a grueling process to run for political office. And I got respect for anybody on either side of the aisle that'll go through the ringer. You can't just be tolerant. You have to be supportive. And Evelyn, as you'll see this evening, is amazingly supportive and is a driving force behind Andrew's success, just like a lot of you are. Now, let me ask you, how many folks here would describe themselves as Yang Gang right now? All right, very nice. How many of you would describe yourself, and we're all friends, Yang Curious? Get some Yang Curiosity. All right, I like Yang Curiosity. So we have a term in the Yang world for Yang Curious. It's also called soon-to-be Yang Gang. That's the other thing that we call it. So I met him early in the year, and then late in March, I signed on, and I was at an event where I saw probably the most ideologically diverse group of attendees for a Democratic presidential event that I had ever seen. I saw Trump supporters, Sanders, Clinton, Jill Stein, Gary Johnson, fair amount of libertarian-minded folks, people that have never voted before, especially younger voters, which is so critical for Democrats to be successful, not just to win, but also to govern. And also folks that had given up on voting, never again voters, which is incredibly discouraging as somebody who's been in public life. But it is so exciting to see a candidate who, more than any other candidate this cycle, is able to turn them on. So I see a guy with a MAGA sweatshirt on, and at the end of the event, I approach him, and I say, you have just sat through a 90-minute event with a young Asian American man who's promising to give every American citizen, 18 and older, $1,000 a month for the rest of their life. Are you attending the correct event? And he looked at me and he said, you bet. Here's the thing, he said. Donald Trump, after 3 years of being president at that point, he realized that he was the wrong answer to the right question, and that Andrew Yang was the right answer to the right question. To which I said, what the hell's the right question? This is kind of important. And he lit up, and he said, how come at a time when GDP is at record highs, the stock market, record highs, unemployment, record low, inflation, record low, these indicators over the course of all of our lifetime indicate that you should feel unparalleled prosperity, that your children should be, with great confidence, in the best position financially in the history of this country. And yet the vast majority of Americans, this gentleman said, feel like they are walking an economic tightrope with no safety net underneath. This is the reality of the economy, and it is not enough to say that Trump is the problem. He is a symptom to the problem. And if we do not address the underlying factors that led to Donald Trump's election, that have led to the tumult of today politically, we run the risk of 4 more years of that tumult, and we risk a generation lost and even more cynicism in the way that we govern. That's pretty big stakes, and that means we need pretty big leadership. And you're lucky, because in a few minutes you get to see the next president of the United States who is going to do something about it, ladies and gentlemen. That guy is Andrew Yang. Are you excited about that? Good. So he's got exquisite judgment. Don't believe me. Don't even believe his website. Believe the quality of the person that is his best friend and his partner for life, Evelyn Yang. She is going to be out here in a second. I met her over the course of this trip. We're going to show her some New Hampshire hospitality. This is her first foray. She did not decide to run for president, but man, Andrew would not be if she wasn't all in. Sophisticated first-generation American, just like Andrew, just like me, just like many of you, I suspect. Columbia undergrad, a master's degree, has been successful in the private sector, very passionate in terms of autism. As you know, you may know, their oldest son, Christopher, is on the autism scale, on the spectrum, and has been a leader both regionally and nationally on that issue as well. And we're really lucky to have her today. So with no further ado, to introduce the next President of the United States is the next First Lady of the United States, Evelyn Yang. There you go. There you go. Good to see you. Thank you. There you go.
Thank you, Steve, and happy birthday. Today, Steve's turns 31. 31? Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today. I've only recently started to join Andrew on the trail because we have 2 young boys at home who keep me pretty busy. But I love being here when I can. And I think I'm pretty useful to Andrew because after being together now for almost 15 years, I'd like to think that I'm his best character witness. Andrew is a wonderful husband, father, and friend. He's a man of the highest integrity. He doesn't lie. I've never known him to do a single unscrupulous thing, but he's far from a stick in the mud. He is so much fun, and he is flexible, but also principled and has exceptional judgment when it comes to filtering out the things that really matter. He is generous in heart and soul and action. By the way, I took all of that from our wedding vows. I'm just kidding. Our wedding vows were way more generic. But all that aside, here is why I think my husband, Andrew Yang, would be a great president. It is so upsetting how divided our nation has become. It's why we can't get anything done. Andrew's campaign message is humanity first. That includes all of us. He says all the time, it's not left, it's not right, it's forward. His intention was loud and clear from the start. He's not here to play partisan politics. He has never dreamed of being president or even being in politics. His goal is to solve problems and improve the lives of all Americans. Of course, $1,000 a month can't solve all our problems. We as a country have a lot of big systemic changes to work on. And if you look into any of Andrew's 150 plus policy proposals, then you will see that he fully intends to do this work. But the freedom dividend is a critical first step in the right direction. It will help pave the road ahead so that millions of Americans can lift up their heads and look forward, plan, save for a rainy day, and hope for a brighter future. That's why I so embrace this campaign and the work that my husband is doing putting humanity first. What humanity first means to me is investing in people first. This will supercharge our families and supercharge our communities. As Andrew puts it, it's the trickle-up economy, from our people and communities up. What really bewilders me is this completely top-down approach that all politicians take. It's common sense that you need to take a bottom-up approach as well. What about putting resources directly into people's hands so that they can make the best decisions for themselves and for their families? Andrew is the only one talking about tackling issues in a people-centered way. It's why the more people hear from him, the more they want to hear from him. He makes too much sense, and you realize that this is what we've been missing from politics. Now please join me in welcoming the next President of the United States, my husband, Andrew Yang.
Hello, Concord. How are you? Oh, thank you. That's so kind. I am so thrilled to have Evelyn out campaigning with me because people can find out just how lucky a guy that I am. And occasionally someone thanks me for running for president, and I say, thank my wife, because one, she let me run in the first place, and number two, she's the one who's been making the most sacrifice in terms of taking care of our boys while I've been on the road. I love you and appreciate you, Evelyn. Thank you. It's tremendous to be back here in New Hampshire. How many of you know I went to high school here in the state? I graduated from Phillips Exeter Academy in '92. I learned a lot there. It was a very difficult environment, though. It's a bit of a pressure cooker. You probably know that, right? And after I graduated from Exeter, I went to college in Rhode Island at Brown University, not that far from here. Then I went to law school and spent 5 whole months as a lawyer, and then left to start a business. How many of you have started a business or organization or a mailing list or a club? Raise your hand. All right, so if you have your hand up, you know a couple things. Number one, it's a lot harder than anyone lets on. And number two, when someone asks you how it's going, what do you say? Great. My business went great until it failed. My parents told their friends I was still a lawyer because they're Asian, among other things. But I've been bitten by the bug, and I wanted to get better at building something, like a business. So I joined another small company, and then another, and then I became the CEO of an education company that grew to become #1 in the United States and was bought by a bigger company in 2009. So 2009 was the heart of the financial crisis. How many of you were here in New Hampshire in 2009, 11 years from now? It's hard to believe it's already been 11 years. How was that time here in Concord or here in New Hampshire? Horrible, stressful. I was at another event here in New Hampshire, and I asked this question, and a 14-year-old boy raised his hand and said it was really hard. And then I looked at him, and I was like, you must have been 4 years old. Like, how do you remember this? And then he said that his family had to sell his house. And then I said, oh, you would remember then, because you don't forget that kind of thing. It was devastating for so much of the country, and I felt like I had some insight as to why our economy had crashed. It was because so many of the wannabe whiz kids I'd gone to Exeter and Brown and Columbia with had gone straight to Wall Street and come up with mortgage-backed securities and derivatives and exotic financial instruments. And I thought, what a train wreck that is. Like, that's like the opposite of what you want people to do. So I thought, okay, what should we be doing? What should they be doing? And the vision I came up with was to head to cities like Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, Birmingham, and help create businesses and create jobs. Now, that's a very high bar, but I thought, well, we could have people come and work at existing growth companies in those communities, and then at the end of 2 years, if they want to start their own business, then they could have access to a seed fund and mentorship and learn the way I learned, by working with someone more experienced. How does that sound to you all? Good. Oh, thank you. I mean, so again, full credit to Evelyn because when she and I met, I was a pretty normal guy. And so then when I came back and was like, hey, I think I'm going to quit my job and start a nonprofit, try and create thousands of jobs around the country, train hundreds of entrepreneurs. So she was a very good sport. How many of you all work at nonprofits or government now? I mean, it's sort of, I'll say nonprofits explicitly. How many of you volunteer for a nonprofit? There, you should just raise your hand to that one. That's like, are you a good person? And be like, yes, I am. So I started this nonprofit by putting some of our savings into this new 501c3 I started. And then I called rich friends with this question: do you love America? And then the smart among them said, what does it mean if I say yes? And I said, at least $10,000. And then 12 of them said, I love America for $10,000. I was like, I thought you did. So we start with a couple $100,000 that grows to the millions. I run this organization for 7 years, helped create several thousand jobs in 15 cities around the country. We were honored by the Obama administration multiple times, so I got to bring Evelyn to meet the president. My in-laws were really excited about me that week. They were like, she did all right. Look at these pictures. But unfortunately, while I was traveling the country, I had this sinking feeling that things were getting better, not worse. How many of you are from New England or upstate New York like me? How about the Midwest? South? West Coast or Mountain West? Southwest? I was staggered by the gulf between regions, where if you fly between Michigan and Manhattan or St. Louis and San Francisco, you felt like you were crossing dimensions or decades or ways of life, and not just a few time zones. But I was still stunned when Donald Trump became our president in 2016. You remember that night well, I'm sure. How did you react that night? Tears, like, oh, groan, like, oh, no. Evelyn and I reacted the same way. It was a real sense of, like, wow, that just happened. And to me, this was a very strong red flag that tens of millions of our fellow Americans decided to take a bet on the narcissist reality TV star as our president. And even if you were shocked and dismayed, we all have family members and friends and neighbors who were excited about the outcome. Oh, if you were to turn on cable news that night, or really any night since then, why would you think that Donald Trump won? Why would you think that Donald Trump's our president today? 77,000 people. Yeah, some people in these key states that went to Trump, yes. Media. Non-politician, racism, not Hillary Clinton. Turnout, emails, Facebook, FBI, Electoral College, businessman, Russia again. Angry. All of these things mixed together and said, this is why. But I'm a numbers guy, and so I went looking for an explanation in the numbers, and I found it. We automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs over the last number of years. And where were those jobs primarily based? Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, all the swing states that Donald Trump needed to win and did win. And you may know this in part because this happened in New Hampshire a bit earlier. You all lost over 12,000 manufacturing jobs in the northern part of the state. And when you go to those towns, you see, after the factory or plant or mill closed, then the shopping district closed, then people started to leave, the school shrank, and that community has never recovered. I saw the exact same thing in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Missouri. And what happened to those jobs, unfortunately, is now shifting to other parts of the economy. How many of you have noticed stores closing around where you live here in New Hampshire? And why are those stores closing? Amazon, that's right. Amazon soaking up $20 billion in business every year, closing 30% of our stores and malls. The most common job in the country is retail clerk. Average retail clerk's a 39-year-old woman making between $8 and $10 an hour. When her store closes, what is her next move going to be? Stay at home, unemployment, unsure. How much did Amazon pay in taxes last year? Zero. That's the math. Concord, $20 billion out, 30% of your stores and malls closed forever, you get zero back. Now, we all see those types of changes at the grocery stores and the CVS and the fast food restaurant, but it's more pervasive throughout the economy. When you all call the customer service line of a big company and you get the bot or software, I'm sure you do the same thing I do, which is you pound 000, say human, representative, human, until you get someone on the line, right? Raise your hand if that's what you do. Oh yeah, we all do that. The software is terrible. As soon as you hear it, you're like, please let this company still employ a human after I get through whatever tree you have. And in 2 or 3 short years, the software is going to sound like this. Hey, Andrew, how's it going? What can I do for you? It'll be fast, seamless, delightful, a little bit overly friendly. What is that going to mean for the 2.5 million Americans who work at call centers right now making $10 to $14 an hour? How many of you all know a truck driver here in New Hampshire? It's the most common job in 29 states. My friends in California are working on trucks that can drive themselves. They say they're 98% of the way there. A robot truck just transported 20 tons of butter from California to Pennsylvania with no human intervention just 2 weeks ago. Why did they choose 20 tons of butter for this? I have no idea. But if you Google robot butter truck, you'll see. And at the end was a giant stack of pancakes now. So well, what is this going to mean for the 3.5 million truckers or the 7 million Americans who work in truck stops, motels, and diners that rely upon the truckers getting out and having a meal every day? You can think about our highway system as like a circulatory system, and the trucks are like blood cells. And they're carrying their cargo, yes, but they're also carrying economic vitality because that trucker has to get out and sleep and eat and shower and see a movie. 10% or almost 10% of the jobs in Nebraska support trucking. What will happen to those communities when the robot truck does not need to stop in Nebraska anymore? So these are the changes that I saw when I started going through the data in 2017. Trump wins, I look and I say, oh my gosh, we're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country, what experts are calling the fourth industrial revolution. When's the last time you heard a politician say fourth industrial revolution? Just now, 3 seconds ago. And I'm barely a politician. And Evelyn will tell you, she always thought I'd make a terrible politician because I'm quite bad at lying. You can ask, like when I was going to propose to her, I was trying to surprise her, and I felt like it was like written all over my face. And I was like, she knows what I'm going to say. She said yes. Hey, we got there. So we're going through this incredible economic transformation. And immigrants are being scapegoated for issues immigrants have next to nothing to do with. It's not like immigrants are going to drive these trucks. I mean, it's going to be machines and AI. It's starting to rip through the most common jobs in the economy beyond manufacturing. And so I went to our leaders in D.C. and I said, what are we going to do to help our people manage this transition? What do you think the folks in D.C. said to me when I said, what are we going to do? Go away, what transition, be quiet. At another event, someone made this Scooby-Doo noise. It was like, yeah. So those were the responses I got. Not that Scooby-Doo noise, but the responses I got were, we can't talk about this. We should study this further. And we must educate and retrain all Americans for the jobs of the future. How many of you heard that from someone? Yeah, that's everywhere. Yeah, Joe Biden said that, it's true. So then I'm the numbers guy, so I said, hey, I looked at the studies. You all want to guess how effective government-funded retraining programs were for the manufacturing workers who lost their jobs? It's at 3%, very low. I'm anchoring you low. It is low. It's 0 to 15%, their total failure. Half of the workers who lost their manufacturing jobs never worked again. Of that group, half filed for disability. You then saw surges in suicides and drug overdoses in those communities to the point that American life expectancy has now declined for the last 3 years in a row. You know the last time American life expectancy declined 3 years in a row? The Spanish flu of 1918. That's right. You have to go back 100 years. It is highly unusual for life expectancy to ever decline in a developed country because you ordinarily get richer, stronger, healthier, and just keeps on inching up. In the U.S., it's gone down and then down and then down again. Almost unprecedented. You're in the, that's a good question. I'll have to look that up. I don't think they're dying younger, though they do have some real social ills. Oh yeah, that's like population shrinkage. This is like actually like so what happened in the US is that suicides and drug overdoses both each overtook vehicle deaths for the first time in history. And then it's gotten so widespread that it's actually brought down our societal life expectancy as a whole, because these overdose victims and suicide victims tend to be like not, in their 70s or 80s. And New Hampshire is ground zero for the opiate epidemic. That this disease of hyper-capitalism that has destroyed families and communities. So when I said, hey, these retraining programs don't work to the folks in DC, they looked and said, well, I guess we'll get better at them then. And one person said something that brought me here to you all in Concord today. He said, Andrew, you're in the wrong town. No one here is going to do anything about this. Because fundamentally, Washington, D.C. is a town of followers, not leaders. And the only way we will do anything about it is if you were to create a wave in other parts of the country and bring that wave crashing down on our heads. He said this to me. And I said, challenge accepted. I will be back in 2 years with the wave. So now, most of you know this, I stand before you, fifth in the polls to be the Democratic nominee. We raised $16.5 million last quarter in increments of only $35 each, so my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. But there's no corporate PAC money. This is the wave that can rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy to work for us, to work for you, to work for your families, to work for our kids. You all are among the most powerful people in this country today. I don't know if you feel that, but I did the math. Do you know how many Californians each of you is worth? 1,000. 1,000 Californians each. So how many of us are in this room today? I'm going to give a Trumpian estimate. There are 750 people in the room. I'd say there are probably about like 80 people in the room. So 80 people still would be 2 football stadiums full of Californians. That's the power that you have to do something the rest of America only dreams of, which is to flush the pipes of government clean of all the lobbyist cash that have overrun the place and then bring us in a new direction. That's why it's always such a thrill to campaign here, because of this power that you all have. So the question is, how are you going to use this power in 32 short days? What are we going to do with it? What is the vision to present to the rest of the country? If you're here today, at some point you heard that there's a man running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. You remember hearing that? Raise your hand if that's... How many of you saw one of the TV ads? Let me try that. That's good, because we spent a lot of money on those ads. And so if you hadn't, I'd have to reorganize the advertising department. So I know the first time you heard about this freedom dividend of $1,000 a month, you thought, that's a gimmick, that's too good to be true, that will never happen. But this is not my idea, and it's not a new idea. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country. He called it the citizen's dividend for all Americans. Martin Luther King fought for it in the 60s, and it is what he was fighting for when he was killed in 1968. I know this in part because I had the privilege of sitting with Dr. King's son in Atlanta, and he said this is what his father was fighting for. It was so mainstream that 1,000 economists, including Milton Friedman, one of the fathers of modern economics, endorsed this plan in the 60s, and it passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Richard Nixon. It was called the Family Assistance Plan. Would have guaranteed a certain level of income to all families. And then 11 years later, one state passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year. No questions asked. And what state is that? Alaska. And how does Alaska pay for it? Oil. And what is the oil of the 21st century? Data, technology, AI, self-driving cars and trucks. A study just came out that said that our data is now worth more than oil. How many of you saw that study? How many of you got your data check in the mail last month? So if our data is now worth billions of dollars a year, who's getting the money? Facebook, Amazon, Google, Apple, the mega tech companies that are paying zero or near zero in taxes. You see how it's happening? We're getting depleted and sucked dry, and the biggest winners in this economy are paying virtually nothing back. We're looking at our kids and our families and our communities saying, why do things seem like they're heading in the wrong direction? How many of you are parents like me and Evelyn? If you're a parent at some point in the last number of years, you've felt like we're leaving our kids a more uncertain, unstable future than the lives that we've led. And the reason we feel that way is because it's true. It's not just climate change either. It's the fact that if you were born in the 1940s in this country, there was a 93% chance that you were going to be better off than your parents. That's the American dream. That's what brought my family here, Evelyn's family here. That's what we've all aspired to. If you were born in the 1990s in this country, you're down to a 50-50 shot, and it's declining fast. That is why we feel the way we do about our kids' future, because by the numbers, it is eroding. This is one reason why Donald Trump won, is because people looked at the future and they did not feel positive and optimistic about it. They had this sinking feeling that so many of us have felt over the last number of years. So our vision, your power, is to rewrite the rules of this 21st century economy to work for us and our kids. And this $1,000 dividend that seems too good to be true is very, very easy to pay for as long as we get our tiny fair share of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile, every AI work unit. Amazon, this $1 trillion tech company, is paying less in taxes than everyone here in this room. Whose fault is that? Is it their fault? No, it's their job to pay as little in taxes as possible. It's our fault. It's our government's fault. You have to be pretty asleep at the switch to say 0 in taxes for Amazon, thumbs up, acceptable. That is what you all have to change in 32 days. This is how we rewrite the rules. You take a tiny sliver of that value that's getting siphoned out of your community and put it back into your hands. Build a trickle-up economy from our people, families, and communities up. This $1,000 a month that we're championing for every American that stacks on top of Social Security, so it would be the greatest expansion of Social Security benefits in generations. One of the reasons why it's going to be so powerful is that it's going to stay, where is the money going to go? How would you spend it? How much of it would stay right here in New Hampshire? Most all of it. Not all of it. You might get your own Netflix password. You might... But most of it would go to car repairs and daycare expenses and Little League signups and local nonprofits and religious organizations and Democratic Party dues. This is the way to rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy to actually reflect our goals, needs, and values in our communities. We're being told about how great things are right now. Record high corporate profits, record high GDP, record low unemployment. But again, you look around, you're saying, I'm not sure if things are that great. And again, you are right. You have record high corporate profits in this country. You know what else are record highs? Stress, financial insecurity, student loan debt, mental illness, depression, suicides, drug overdoses. Again, if your corporate profits are going up and your life expectancy is going down, which do you listen to? We know which one DC is listening to. They can't even see people and wellness and life expectancy. They just see the dollar signs. Washington, D.C. today is the richest city in our country. What do they produce? Whatever they produce, business is very, very good. Donald Trump wanted to drain the swamp. I want to distribute the swamp. What I mean by that is, why are we spending all of this money employing hundreds of thousands of people in the most expensive region in our country? If we could move some of those jobs to New Hampshire or Ohio or Michigan, we would save billions of dollars because everything would be cheaper in those places. Put jobs someplace where people would be thrilled to have them. And I would argue that the decisions these agencies make would be better because they live someplace normal instead of in a DC bubble where they just look at each other all day. So this is how we make government work for us again. We have to get our economic measurements right, because right now we're following GDP and corporate profits off a cliff. Robot trucks will be great for both GDP and corporate profits. They're going to be very bad for a lot of Americans. So how would we measure our economic progress in a way that would get it right? Health and life expectancy, yes. Happiness, mental health, and freedom from substance abuse. childhood success rates, education, clean air and clean water. Oh, sure. You know what? One thing I'm for too? Term limits. It's like the goal of going to Washington should be to get something done for your community and then come home. It should not be to sort of crouch there and be like, ooh, I like this place. I should just try and stay here for as long as possible. It's an issue. Of course it's an issue. We look up and we're like, what the heck is going on in this place? So one thing I will say to you all, after I'm your president for 8 years and do as much as I can for the American people, I will leave that town and you will never hear from me again. So we have to measure the things that actually would tell us how we are doing. If we get this wrong, we're going to continue to be told how great things are while, frankly, things get worse underneath our feet. As your president, it will be my privilege to modernize our economic measures to clean air and clean water and mental health and childhood success rates and present them to you every year at the State of the Union. I'll be the first president to use a PowerPoint deck at the State of the Union. I'm going to see which way everything's going. I like that. It's a good question. So first, I just want to hammer home the point about our economic measurements. My wife, Evelyn, whom you all now have met, is at home with our 2 boys every day, one of whom is autistic. How much is her work calculated at in our economic measures? 0. Evelyn and stay-at-home parents around the country get 0 in terms of economic value. Caregivers, people taking care of ailing and aging loved ones, 0. Volunteers, activists, 0. Coaches, mentors, 0. Artists, 98% of the time, 0. Local journalists getting zeroed out. We put 2,000 local papers out of business. You know what functions much, much worse if you don't have local news? Democracy. How the heck can you expect citizens to vote on what's going on in their community if there's no local news source telling them what the heck is going on in the community and what their local officials are doing? Now, this list is a list of the things that we're meant to prize most highly and dearly. Our loved ones, our families, our community, our democracy. And we are allowing them to get zeroed out one by one. Because right now in America, everything revolves around the almighty dollar. If you have money on one side and people on the other, money wins, people lose. That's what we have to change together over this next, really, it's like a 1 month or so, that we have this historic opportunity to turn things around, to get in there and let people know that economic value and human value are not the same things. That if we allow ourselves to get suckered into thinking they are, it's going to be increasingly disastrous for us all over time. That if you look at our son or people who are differently able or neurologically atypical, we have to look at them and say, you have intrinsic value as a human being. We can't keep trying to stuff everyone into some market-sized hole. That's how you wind up with otherwise reasonable people saying we should turn thousands of coal miners into coders, even though that makes no sense on the face of it. So this is what we have to change. This is the case you all have to take to the rest of the country in 32 short days, that we have intrinsic value as Americans, as citizens, and as human beings. Donald Trump is our president today because he had a very simple message. He said he was going to make America great again. What did Hillary Clinton say in response? It's already great. I know, it's been a long 3 years, Concord. But it is about to end. That response did not go over well because we have to grapple with and acknowledge the depth and severity and reality of the problems in our communities. There are many people being left behind. There's a lot of suffering. But then we need real solutions that will actually move our country forward. What were Donald Trump's solutions? Build a wall, turn the clock back, bring the old jobs back. Concord, you know we have to do the opposite of these things. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society to rise to the real challenges of the 21st century. We have to evolve in the way we think about ourselves and our work and our value. I am the ideal candidate for this job because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. Thank you very much, Concord. You may not know this, but math is an acronym. What does it stand for? Make America think harder. That's right. That is your job in 32 days. It is your job to move this country, not left, not right, but forward. And I know that's just where you're going to take us, Concord. Let's fight this and win this for the sake of our kids. Thank you all very much. That's beautiful. Thank you. All right, I think now we have some time for some questions. Who's got a mic that they can run to? Some good people. We have someone? Yeah, I'll let you choose. Give it to me.
I would like to know a little more about your health insurance plan for someone who is, we run an independent business. We carry our own health insurance. My husband and I pay $13,000 a year for health insurance for two of us to have a $5,000 deductible per person. So technically, before my health insurance kicks in, I've spent $22,000.
First, congratulations on being a small business owner and small business person, because that's like the life's blood.
My husband's actually a physician.
Oh, he's a physician? I've been in your shoes, because I've run a small private business and then looked around and said, okay, how do we cover ourselves, our employees? And if you're a small firm, you get shell shock when you see the prices they're charging you. Because if you're a small firm, the prices are so much higher. If you're in a big firm, the prices go down a little bit, but still not that much. You know what no American has ever gotten? A letter from their health insurance company saying, great news, the rates went down this year. Now, rates only go up and up and up. So what we have to do is provide universal health care in this country and let people know that if you're an American, you will have access to coverage that's high access and low cost or with very, very low deductibles. And the reason why I'm so confident that we can make this happen without breaking the bank is because I've looked at the numbers. We already spend $3.6 trillion on our healthcare to worse results than other countries. And the reason for that is that our healthcare system is not designed to make us healthier. What's it designed for? It's designed to make maximum profit and revenue for drug companies, device companies, and private insurance companies. And they just ratchet up the price every single year. That's their business model, and now it's breaking our backs. You're looking at it and you're saying, like, this is crazy. So what the government has to do is come in and say, look, we're going to provide blanket coverage, and this will allow us to actually put pressure on the private insurance companies to say, maybe I can't just jack my prices up every year. Maybe I can't just charge whatever I want because people have no choice but to pay. So that is the plan. Universal health care for all Americans that actually is trying to design to make us stronger and healthier, emphasizes preventative care rather than just waiting for you to get sick, integrates mental health into our healthcare system because a lot of these issues have a mental health component. If we do it right, then we can actually change the incentives for the individual providers. What kind of physician is your husband? Well, good for him, because that's actually the most wholesome type of medicine there is. Like, you go, and it's hard to find a family medicine practitioner because, I'm just going to go through this very quickly, but I think it's important. Because medical school costs $200,000, you go through it, and then they're like, hey, now that you owe $200,000, what do you want to do? Do you want to do something that's a little more lucrative? Or do you want to do something that takes care of people? And then what do people do? Being like, I guess I should make more money because I now owe $200,000. So you have a shortage of family care doctors and primary care doctors around the country. And that's one of the things we have to change. But as someone who's run a private company, I know that our health insurance system right now is the worst of all worlds because it makes it harder for everyone to change jobs. It makes it harder for anyone to start a business. It's freezing us in place. It makes it so if you hire someone, what do? You turn them into a temp gig or contract worker and say, like, you're not a real employee because I don't want to pay for your health insurance. It's like everyone is always working 19 hours a week because you just want to keep it below a threshold and being like, hey, you don't really work for me. I just need you to show up 19.5 hours a week. There are all of these really, really perverse impacts of our current system that we need to change. Go ahead and choose someone. I'll let you. Oh, thank you.
I have some concerns because I volunteer, in addition with AARP, I volunteer at a healthcare facility. And I'm a cancer survivor, so I volunteer at my chemo center where I was treated. And a 62-year-old man became unemployed because he had a recurrence of his disease, couldn't work any longer, ran out of COBRA, couldn't afford private health care premiums, and dipped into his retirement, then had to go without his remission-inducing medication for a few months. He's now in full-blown disease and he's dying. 1 in 5 citizens in our state are rationing their medications because they can't afford to take their prescribed doses, and sometimes there are dire consequences to that. Yes. These are people whose lives or life expectancies are being changed by dollars. If elected, what would you do to lower the cost of prescription medications?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for volunteering to take care of people who've been through the same sort of thing. Number one, we should make those TV ads for prescription drugs illegal immediately. There are only 2 countries that allow them, the United States of America and New Zealand. I have no idea why New Zealand allows them. And just on a very brief aside, if I have to hear one more horrific list of side effects, like it would be like many, you know, it's like it always goes down this list and all of a sudden it's like terrible, terrible things. Like, so you end up being like, anyway. So I've got a 5-part plan to bring the cost of prescription drugs down. Because right now they're outlandish and out of control, and I meet people who are rationing them, which is obviously not the way they're intended to be used, or they're making a choice between their drugs and food or heating oil or what have you. So here's a 5-part plan. Number one, the U.S. government has to be able to negotiate for lower drug prices on behalf of the American people. That seems very obvious, but right now lobbyists are so powerful in D.C. that we are not allowed to do that. It's crazy. They get to fix their own prices. Number two, they have to charge us the same amount that they're charging citizens of other countries. Right now, our drug companies are routinely charging us 2, 3, 4 times as much as they charge citizens of other countries, even though we subsidize the development of the drugs. Doesn't make any sense. Number 3, if they fail at number 2, then we can publicly license the drug. And then number 4, we have a public manufacturing facility to actually manufacture the drug. So that's like the giant club that like, hey, if you gouge us, then we're going to take the license and manufacture it. And number 5, we can import drugs from other countries in order to have price competition. Do you think that plan would work? Yeah. That is just about the only plan that would work, because if you went to drug companies and said, do the right things, we're human beings, like, they wouldn't care. They're like, I get paid tens of millions of dollars to gouge you all. But then if you say, hey, the gouging doesn't work if you abuse your pricing, all of a sudden then their behaviors would change very, very quickly. I have a friend who's a financial genius who looked at the numbers of these companies, and she said she was shocked at the profiteering and price gouging and abuses going on. She said she's never seen anything like it. And the reason why it's that bad is because the drug lobbies have the run of our government. And the clearest sign of that is what happened with the opiate epidemic. Purdue Pharma dispensed hundreds of thousands, even millions of OxyContin prescriptions, saying it was a non-addictive wonder drug. There was one point when Ohio had more OxyContin and opiate prescriptions than it did human beings. Think about that. And our government turned a blind eye to this for years. And then eventually they fined Purdue Pharma $635 million, which sounds like a lot, until you realize Purdue made $30 billion. They got the equivalent of a 2% fine. And we've been wrestling with the consequences. I know people here have lost people to the opiate epidemic ever since. This is what happens when drug companies run our government. And this is what you all have to change. We have to take back our government to actually work for us again and not the drug companies. There's a question in the back about the deficit, which I'll touch on in a minute, but let's see where he's going.
Hi, I'm Bo Peterson. I live here in Concord. I'm wondering about your environmental plans, and I think global warming is a huge threat to us. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
How many of you are concerned about climate change like Bob?
Yeah.
Me too. It's existential threat 1A that's bearing down on us. And so here are the steps you have to take. And the fossil fuel companies are a bit like the drug companies where they've got the run of the place. So first, we have to zero out the subsidies that are heading to fossil fuel companies, these tens of billions of dollars, and then move those subsidies to wind, renewable, solar energy. Number 2, we have to put a price on carbon emissions immediately. Because again, these companies only respond to dollars and cents. So if you make it's like, hey, you emit more, you pay more, then all of a sudden you'll see their behavior change. And you take all of that money and then you also use that to subsidize progress towards renewable energy sources. We have to build in climate change into our economic measurements. How much is climate change going to cost? Trillions and trillions of dollars. And unfortunately, thousands and thousands of lives. So if you build in those costs, then you realize that if someone's polluting, then there's actually contributing to this $1 trillion cost. And doing nothing is incredibly expensive and costly itself. One of the frustrations I have is when politicians talk about climate change as if it's something we can prevent. We're already there. The 4 last years have been the 4 warmest years. I was in Portsmouth and they have buildings that are flooding now more than they were. Shrimping businesses are shrinking because the water got warm. It's here. It's here now. So we need to invest billions of dollars in making our communities stronger, more resilient, more adaptive now, and not leave people on their own to fend for themselves when the storm surge comes or the flood comes or the fire comes or these disasters that are becoming more and more frequent and powerful. The toughest challenge in this is that America is only responsible for 15% of global emissions. So even if we got everything right, the rest of the world would continue to emit at very high levels and the earth would continue to warm. What's happening in Africa is that the Chinese government is going to them and saying, hey, we've got a coal-burning power plant for you. What do you think? And then what does the African government say? Sure, I just want energy, cheap. I don't care if it's dirty. So what do we have to do to change that? We have to go to the same African government and say, don't take the coal-burning power plant. Here are solar panels that we will subsidize to the point where they're a no-brainer for you. That's where we have to try and lead the world as quickly as possible. A lot of it right now stems from the fact that people feel like fighting climate change is too expensive. And again, that's what we have to disabuse people of, because the most expensive thing we can do is just let it run over us.
I'm not sure whether they consider you qualified for the next debate stage, but we all consider you as qualified. Am I right, Concord?
Thanks, I appreciate it.
So you did this fantastic live streaming of answering questions like 8-10 hours once. I think that was fantastic. So in the event that you don't go to the debate stage, would you consider doing something similar to that, like live streaming, responding to the questions like, you know, Vice President Biden just said this. What's your response, Mr. Yang?
Well, thank you for the sentiment. We're thinking of how we would respond to not making the debate, and we'll have some kind of fun thing like what you're suggesting. The great thing now, though, is that we're in crunch time, where we raised $16.5 million last quarter. We're still growing, and we can now make our case directly to voters right here in New Hampshire and Iowa. We are the best campaign to take on and defeat Donald Trump in 2020. And I'll give you a couple of indicators. First, what's the number one criteria that Democratic primary voters have for the nominee? Beat Trump. That's right. One study came out right here in New Hampshire, one survey that said that 10% or more of Trump voters in New Hampshire would choose me over Donald Trump in the general. Another survey came out that said 18% of college Republicans would choose me over Trump in the general. So Democrats and progressives are looking for someone to beat Trump. I'm already stealing some of his base. And if you take the Dems and progressives and then add the independents and the libertarians and the disaffected Trump voters, we win very cleanly. And I'm going to give you one very big data point that shows my relative strength against Trump. I am the only candidate in the field that he has not touched online, in part because he knows I'm better at the internet than he is. And one of his senior advisors was caught on film at a private event saying, if there's a candidate we're worried about, it's Andrew Yang. So they know. And now what we have to do is make that case to voters right here in New Hampshire that this is the campaign that can cut right to the heart of his support, because we are laser focused on solving the same problems that got him elected. Instead of treating him like the cause of all of our problems, we treat him like a symptom, and we have to cure the underlying disease. So thank you, Concord. Let's make history together in just 32 short days. And I do want to just address the gentleman's point about the deficit really quickly. I've run businesses and organizations. When you have a debt problem, you look at revenue and expenses. Does America have a revenue problem? Yes, because you have trillion-dollar companies paying zero. So if you change that, you can generate hundreds of billions very, very quickly with a big up arrow attached to it. When robot trucks are on the highways, how much tax revenue will we get right now? Zero, because it's going to be a big tech company that's benefiting and they don't pay taxes. So that's what we have to change as quickly as possible. But if you give us a slice of that, then you get your revenue up very, very quickly. Do we have an expense problem? Yes. And what are the expense problems? I would say perhaps the big Mar-a-Lago, it's funny. I'd say one of the biggest sources of spending is the military-industrial complex. We're spending $700 billion a year on our military in ways that don't necessarily make us stronger, safer, more secure. We're not treating our veterans right when they come home. We spent more than $1 trillion in Iraq, $6 trillion in the Middle East. Terrible cost in terms of the human toll for our men and women when they come home. What did we get out of that $6 trillion plus? So this is where we need to start channeling our resources more intelligently. We need to move that $700 billion towards things that will make us stronger, safer, more secure, protecting against things like climate change, because that's going to be enormous, strengthening our infrastructure, protecting ourselves against AI and increasing cybersecurity. These are some of the biggest true threats of today. If you buy an extra aircraft carrier, it does not do anything to protect you from climate change or hacking of your infrastructure. So we need to start spending smarter. And if we do that, then we'll actually influence our deficit, because we'll get much higher return on the spending than we're getting now.
All right. Hey, let's give it up one more time. Andrew Yang. Right there. Thank you. There you go. Oh, you're so funny. Come to you, I go to them. I think we're going to do it right here. If you would like a photo with the next President of the United States, you've come to the right place. He's going to be right here. Line up down the center aisle if you can. A little bit of space. Well, getting physical, boxing out, good in basketball, not so good at political events. And please go to one of our staff near the exit at the table. Sign up for a shift to make calls or to knock on doors to spread the gospel. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.